Good evening, everybody. Speak into the mic. I don't think Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? We have a full house today. I'm so thankful that you all could make it. And we're going to call to order now. And we're going to pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Okay, I'm going to introduce the board members, of course, me, Larry, Vice President, Gordon is here, Bruce, Steve Morris, Dan Cook, Bob Warren, Carol Taylor, Dick Too, and of course, honorary mention for Dennis Abrams. He's our donut guy. He keeps everybody happy. Okay, today our speaker is going to be Larry. So Larry, you want to come up and
I come on here? Okay. I figured since our past presidents have all given their military service story, that I would go ahead and do mine since I just stepped down. My story started in 1968 when I graduated from high school of that year, turned 18 in October of that year, and had my draft notice in early December of that year. So it didn't take them long to decide that they needed people. Of course, 1968 wasn't a great year anyway, so for fighting the war in Vietnam. And I knew at that time I did not want to go in the Army, and I did not want to go in the Marine Corps. So I went downtown Phoenix, where all of the recruiters' offices are all lined up on one floor, and started at the Coast Guard. I figured that was the least likely to have to go to Vietnam. I started there and they said, we're not taking anybody. And so I went to the Air Force. They said, 6 months is the best we can do and we can't get you out of the draft. So I went to the Navy and the Navy said, we got this fantastic program called the 3-month delayed entry program. And it will get you out of the draft and you can sign up for the Navy. So I signed on the dotted line for 4 years, and that's how it started. For me, when I went down for induction in March of '69, I tested fairly high, and they said, what do you want to do? Here I am, an 18-year-old. I don't have a clue what I want to do. So I said, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. So they put me in an advanced electronics program, which meant data systems, electronic technician, some fire control, some of those, and then sent me off to boot camp. So I went to boot camp in San Diego and didn't get to go to any other race, MOS, whatever you want to call it, in the Navy, their race. But anyway, I didn't get to go to any of those. I only got to go to the advanced electronic ones. And they didn't tell me this when I signed up for all of this, that if you go into advanced electronics, you have to sign for an additional 2 years out of boot camp. so when I get out of boot camp, they said, oh, you're going to be an electronic technician. We're going to do school. And I said, great, but you have to sign up for 2 more years. So I signed up for 2 more years. And from there, I went to San Diego again for basic electricity school for 8 weeks. Then I went to Treasure Island in the middle of the bay in San Francisco. And I was there for 48 weeks going to electronic school. That electronic school, it was pretty amazing to me. We went to that electronic school, and out of the 48 weeks, we spent 2 weeks on transistors. The whole rest of the school was spent on tube type equipment, because that's what was mainly in the fleet at that time. And so I didn't learn a whole lot about transistors and stuff at that time. Integrated circuits weren't even thought of hardly yet then. They were just starting to develop them. So that's where I got started, was learning about tube type transmitters, receivers, radar equipment, all of that kind of stuff. And so I spent a year there going to that school, 48 weeks. Then I went to Mayor Island for another 3 months of school. Went to a crypto equipment school, where we got to learn how they, at that time, were encrypting teletype signals. And the equipment I went to school on, they go in and they digitize all of this, then they break it into 32 different sections, and they would send it over 32 different channels. At the other end, they would receive 32 different channels if they could, and they would put the whole thing back together again, decrypt it, and that's how the signal went through. You could lose 20% of the signal and still get a readable message. So anyway, that's one of the schools I went to. And from there, I got sent to Guam for 2 years. And right after I finished my first electronic school, I had dated a girl that I met through a friend in boot camp. At the end of school, we got married. So she followed me for the rest of my time in the military. She went everywhere I went. So we went to Guam. I got there in October. She got there in December. And I spent 2 years on Guam. It was a wonderful time. I worked shift work there. I did the shift work we worked was we work a day, a graveyard, evening shift, and then we were off for 2 days. So we'd work 2 days, be off 2 days, work 2 days, be off 2 days. So I got a lot of golf in. So, but it was an interesting place to be because we saw all the messages that were going through to Vietnam. We watched the bombs coming in at the southern end of the island in the naval station, being trucked to Anderson Air Force Base, the northern end of the island, and watching B-52s fully loaded take off from Anderson Air Force Base is just an amazing sight. Because there, when they take off, it's kind of funny because when they take off, it's like when you saw the old planes taking off on aircraft carriers. So when they take off, they're taking off over a cliff. When they get over the end of the runway, it drops down below the cliff, and then they come back up again. It's just amazing to watch a B-52 do that. It's amazing what they can do with a B-52 anyway. It's crazy. Those planes are just fantastic planes. That's why they're still flying. So anyway, that was my experience on Guam. Spent a lot of time on the beach. Besides playing golf, a lot of time on the beach. My son was born over there, which was also nice. From there, I went to, I re-enlisted there. I had so much fun, I re-enlisted. So I could get my re-enlistment bonus more than anything at that time. So they gave me $10,000 to sign up for another 2 years. So I went ahead and did that. I got another year of school out of them because of relocating as well. So from there, I went back to Treasure Island, went back to school for another year of electronics, advanced electronics training at this point. So I spent another year there at Treasure Island, went back to Mayor Island in Vallejo, went to another 3 months of school on critical equipment. Then they sent me to the fleet. I figured it was time for me to go to the fleet. So I got stationed on board the USS White Plains. And now that's a supply ship, and they carry everything. They carried everything. They had fuel, they had ammunition, they had food, they had water, they had everything. Anything that spare parts, anything that was needed, we carried. There were only 450 people on board, but we were about half to 2/3 the size of a carrier. We were big ships. And our captain that we had at the time liked to be at sea. We were home ported in Sasebo, Japan. but we spent most of our time in the Philippines because we had to go over there and resupply, then go out and resupply ships. And so we did what's called UNREP, underway replenishment, for all these different ships out there in the fleet. The one underway replenishment I remember the most is when we did the Enterprise. Pretty amazing, because when we got done with that, they do what they call an emergency breakaway, which is the two ships are going along, transferring all their supplies and everything. And then somebody calls out, emergency breakaway, all the cables from the Enterprise drop in the water. Our ship has to reel them all back in. And during that time, both ships turn away and go as fast as they can, because it means imminent attack. That's what it means when you do an emergency breakaway. The amazing thing about this was, I was in the Combat Central at that time, watching on the radar. And on the radar, we did the breakaway, and two blips of the radar passing, and the Enterprise was gone. She was doing over 60 knots. Our top speed was 18 when we were lucky. And we had following seas and all that, we could get it up to 18 knots. So we didn't go very fast, but two blips of the radar screen and she was gone. And it's just amazing to watch a ship like that, the big carrier, it just sat down in the water like a speedboat. The back end went down, front end came up a little bit, and it just took off. And the ships today are probably a lot more powerful than that. So it's just amazing to watch those ships do that. Couple of other interesting things. Most of my time in the Navy that was interesting was on board a ship. I got to do a lot of things. I got to go to Hong Kong twice, got to go to Singapore, got to go to Korea 2 or 3 times. So I got to see a lot of different places. Didn't get to cross the equator. We were just about to do that. And it was 1974 during the fuel crisis. And they said, no, you can't go that extra 12 miles down to cross the equator and come back. So we didn't do that. And the people, the shellbacks, as we call them, that have already crossed, didn't like that whole lot because they like to put on the show and initiate all the new shellbacks. So they didn't get to do any of that. So they were kind of disappointed. But that was one of the many things we did on there. One of the other things I did on there that was kind of scary, but kind of good in a way too, was I was the senior technician on board our ship. If there was another ship that needed help in their electronics department, I would go help them. And one time we were out at sea, the ship needed help. They strapped me into a bosun's chair. And we go across between the two ships. It's scary when you first do it, but on the way back, it wasn't bad at all, and I kind of enjoyed it because I was strapped in and I knew what was going to happen, so it wasn't quite so bad. But the first time I did that, it's scary. You go out over the side of the ship, and there's nothing out there except the cable holding you up. So, but I did that, helped out a lot of different ships. I helped out a submarine one time, an old diesel boat. They had a problem with one of their radios. And I'm glad I was never stationed on one because they are so small. And I just hated it. Luckily, they were tied up in port, so it wasn't too bad. But their radio control was a closet that had space for one radioman. And behind the wall that he was facing was all their electronic equipment. And that was it. That's all they had for radio. And so you went through the officer's mess, you went through all the different parts of the ship to get to that one little closet to be able to work on their equipment. So luckily we had the spares we needed and we were able to help them get that repaired. But just things like that, just simple experiences like that I had that didn't seem like much at the time. But when you think back on them, it's something that I'll probably never forget because it was just an exciting time in my life. And being stationed on board that ship as well, ported out of Japan, my daughter was born in Japan. So she was born in the military clinic there in Sasebo. So that was another interesting story because to get her back to the States, we had to go to Osaka, Japan, where the embassy was, to get a passport for her. Now, this is a 3-month-old baby, and you have to have a passport for them to get back in the country. But my wife did that, and she did all of that on her own, well, she and a friend. They got on a train in Sasebo, and luckily, some people realized where they were headed because the train halfway to Osaka split. One went to Osaka, the other end went somewhere else. Well, they made sure she got on the right train to get to Osaka. So that's the thing in the military that I really like, is everybody helps everybody out. And it doesn't matter even what service you're with. If you have Army and Navy serving together or anything like that, now they have all these joint bases. All the military helps each other out. It's amazing how all that fellowship works. And I really like that. Another thing that once I got done there, and well, nothing happened to us on board ship. I got a lot of things, like I said, happen there. We went to the South China Sea in 1970, I want to say it was 74, maybe it's 75. Can't remember when Saigon fell. Anyway, we were over there. We just gone into the South China Sea. Our sister ship, another supply ship, was there. And so we were resupplying some ships there. And all of a sudden, we hear over the radio that a helicopter had landed on a destroyer, on a helipad on a destroyer. And they unloaded the people on there, and they tried to push the helicopter over the side. It got piled in the safety netting, and they couldn't get rid of the helicopter. This was the first helicopter to come off the coast when Saigon fell. And then we just listened to the radios. All of these helicopters started coming out and landing on the different ships. What they did was they paid the pilots to take the helicopters out, ditch them in the ocean. Then the ship would send a whaleboat out to pick them up and bring them back. And they just paid them to take any helicopter that landed. They took it out, got rid of it that way. Then we took all these refugees back to the Philippines. Luckily, the ship I was on, we had just gotten there. We went to our sister ship, offloaded all of her supplies, and she took all the people and headed to the Philippines. So when we got back to the Philippines, offloaded most of our supplies because we didn't need them all anymore. We helped some of these refugees get processed, and then they started loading a lot of these refugees onto our ship to take them to Guam. So we start heading to Guam with a full load of refugees, get about halfway to Guam, and all of a sudden, our ship starts doing all kinds of rattling and shaking and all kinds of horrible stuff. So we sent a couple of amateur divers over the side because we didn't have any professional divers at the time. They went down and looked, and one weight was missing off the prop. So when you only got one prop, you limp along at about 3 knots to get anywhere. So we offloaded all these people onto another ship, and we headed back to the Philippines to go into dry dock. And they shipped a new prop out. About a month later, we're back underway again. So it's just things like that that were just so exciting to be involved in. And at the time seemed so normal that it wasn't a big deal. And I really enjoyed all of that time. And then from there, from Japan, we changed home ports the last 3 months I was on board ship. We changed home ports from Sasebo to Yokosuka. And because my daughter was born with asthma, my wife and 2 kids came back to the States. And so she was traveling with 2 kids, a 3-year-old and a newborn, on a military aircraft from Osaka to Tokyo, and then from Tokyo to San Francisco. So she had a lot of fun with that. I was glad I wasn't there, but it would have been nice to be there to help her out. She did get assigned a military person, single male military person to help her out, which wasn't a lot of help, but he didn't know what he was doing either, so that's how it works. But anyway, she gets back to the States and everything has worked out. And so then from there, I got stationed at Alameda Naval Air Station. Another fun place to be. I learned a lot about Navy aviation. and how air traffic control towers work and all that kind of stuff. But we had to maintain a lot of the equipment in the control tower. All of the security equipment on base, all that stuff we were maintaining. And so the other thing we did was we maintained a van. It was like a Suburban. It's fully loaded with electronic communications equipment that we would take out and set up next to the runway when
Lost my.
battery must have run out.
Yeah.
Anyway, we would set up right next to the runway. We had avionics equipment on board. And so we would go pick up a pilot, take him with us, go out, sit up right next to the runway. Anytime we had a plane that was coming in that was having an issue, like landing gear, couldn't tell if it was locked down or something else was wrong, they were low on fuel or some other thing. And so this pilot would get on our radio equipment, but we were set up right next to the runway. He would talk this pilot down, and at the naval air stations, they always have arresting cables on their runways. So we were able to use the arresting cables. This one came in, couldn't tell if his landing gear was locked or not. It didn't say locked. He knew it was down because the tower told him they were down. So he comes in that way, lands, and touches the tail hook on the arresting cable, stops real quick, everything goes smooth, and no problem. But as this guy's coming in, you're thinking, what happens if he misses the hook? What happens if his landing gear isn't locked down? He comes sliding down the runway. You're sitting right next to the runway. So anyway, we only had one major accident at that time, and luckily we weren't out there. It was just a fluke accident that happened. Nobody was killed. It was just a wrecked aircraft. So naval air stations are kind of fun to be at, but they can be kind of hectic too. And one thing with the Alameda Naval Air Station is they had it structured such that the tower could not see the end of the runway. They had to have a closed circuit TV camera that we maintained to see the end of the runway because they put a hanger up so that it blocked that end of the runway. So that was another thing. We'd go up there and help the tower people understand what they're looking at. And so it was an interesting time. And so then from Naval Air Station, my wife left about 3 months before I did. That's where I got discharged from. And so I served 8 years and 8 months because in order to get the Naval Air Station, I had to extend for another 8 months. So you have 2 years to do my shore duty. And then they wanted to send me back to sea for another 6 years. And I said, no, thanks. I got 2 little kids. I want to watch them grow up. So I said, no, thanks. I don't want to do that. And that's when I got out. Luckily, the Navy gave me a great career because all the electronics training I got, I was able to use it. In my future, when I went to work for a radio company up in Phoenix, two-way radio communications company, maintaining equipment up there. Moved to Sierra Vista, managed the shop down there for a while. Down in Sierra Vista, we installed the first mobile data system for police departments down there. And that's one thing Sierra Vista is really good for, is they are always advanced. I think it's the fact that they have so many retired military down there. They're very organized, they're very advanced. They seem to really know what they're doing. So I really enjoyed living down there, but we installed that mobile data system for town of Sierra Vista. And then it was expanded to the county and the other police departments down there. We maintained equipment for all the police departments and fire departments down in the county. So that was one thing I did. And then when I left them, I went to work for the electric co-op in Benson. Did a whole lot more work in electronics, microwave communications, telephone systems, sound systems. That's where I got all my experience to be able to work on stuff around here. So that's why I get volunteered for all that. But the Navy prepared me for all of that. That second electronics school I went to, the second year long one I went to, that's where I got my first exposure to computers. That one, the computers they had there, the way they would teach you is take a pen apart and write down the steps for taking a ballpoint pen apart. You know, what it unscrews and take all the pieces out, and then how to put it back together. And how many steps do you have? If you do it for something as dumb as a computer, it's a lot of steps. So I think we came up with over 150 steps to take a ballpoint pen apart. How to grasp it, how to turn it, which part comes out when, which part goes back in when. I mean, there's a lot to it, and that's how dumb a computer really is until you start programming it and putting human contact into it. So that's what they taught us there at that school was, and it was only a week of computers. They told us how all the computers at the time worked, which were all tube-type computers, which had memory that had to be refreshed all the time. There wasn't any kind of memory like you have now in your computers where you can put it in a memory stick and it stays there forever. This memory had to be refreshed every few seconds. They had to run a pulse through it to refresh it, things like that. So we learned a lot about the very basics of it, machine language programming, how to program a computer in machine language. So we learned a lot, but the way the Navy teaches, or at least that time taught, was a fantastic way to do it. All my schools were 1 or 2 weeks on a subject, and then you go on to the next one. So like my first school, they would teach you a week of algebra. Then they teach you a week of geometry. Then they teach you another week of algebra. Then they teach you trigonometry, and then they teach you calculus. And all of this 1 week classes. So you get a week, you get to learn something, and then and usually these classes were half day. You spend half day learning it, and then you spend half day doing practical tests. So you got to learn it, you got to use it, you got to learn it, you got to use it. And it's a great way to learn, and you learn fast. Basically, in my 2 years of school there, I got the equivalent of an electrical engineering degree minus all of the social classes like English and all that. We didn't get all of that, but we got all the technical aspect of how things work, how they're built. Of course, it's old technology now, because we learned how transistors were built. We didn't learn anything about how microprocessors are built, because that's a whole new ballgame. But anyway, that's what I did. That's how I got all of my experience, and I really enjoyed my time in the Navy. And the closest I got to Vietnam was 5 miles off the coast, resupplying the USS Missouri, and then watching her fire her guns at the coast. That was amazing. Seeing 16-inch guns firing it's an amazing sight. So we got to see that as well. So that's some of my experiences in the Navy. I really enjoyed the time, and it was a very positive experience for me. And what I would like to do is ask any of you that have any experiences that you would like to share with the group to please consider speaking. Everybody wants to hear other people's stories. Nobody wants to tell their own. Everybody wants to hear everybody else's stories. So volunteer to speak once. That's all you have to do is speak once, and then you don't have to speak again if you don't want to. So, anyway, I would like to ask anybody who wants to do that, let the board know. We'll get you on the speakers list. Any questions? Thank you.
Want to present you with paper.
You gotta get out of here.
That isn't motivation to speak, I don't know.
Bruce has a question.
Once the speaker just comes to me, right on that list, I'll put your name down.
Okay, Bob, would you like to come up? He handles our fallen veteran program.
Thank you, Sharon. Again, we don't have any fallen veterans. And Dan, I'm not sure we can. We don't have any fallen veterans is a real blessing. But in the meantime, I think, as I've said at past meetings, it's important for us to remember any of our other veteran friends or other friends who may be sick, ill, in need of help. And just a blessing that we don't have any fallen veterans. Thank you.
Hey, Gordon, you want to come up and give the treasurer's report?
Morning, everybody. The opening balance on February 1st was $3,146.93. The meeting was on February the 5th, but on February the 4th, we had a deposit from PayPal, which was, and they're always kind of, we don't know when they're coming or not, could have been from a month or two before, but it was forwarded to us. It was $54.28. $25 was for a membership from Steven Cisco. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. And then there was $29.28 that we can't figure out. So we'll just say donation. On the 5th, which was the day of the meeting, we had a $307 donation or deposit that day. $107 was from the tin can. And then we had $25 membership donations from Bob Whalen, Sharon, Jim Smith, Carol Taylor, Carol's husband Dennis, Gary Hayden, Jim Oberon, close, and James Dunkelberger. Close, okay. On the 13th, we had a $170 deposit I made, and those were donations from bingo that night. People who won bingo donated part of their winnings. And that would have been $40 from Karen Mitchell, $30 from Stephen Marotti, $40 from Lee Head, and $60 from John Newberry. On the 27th, I made a deposit of $25 from Teresa Lanner, and that was from Casino Night. She had tickets, couldn't use them, sold the tickets back, and that money came back to us at her donation. Expenses, $68.37. Mr. Abrams for our donuts. And we also had an expense of $1,400 to the Sportsman's Fund. And on your tables, I put out an ad that ran in the newspaper, the Daily Star. We sponsored 2 kids for camp. And they ran a nice ad, mentioned sunflower, right in the newspaper. It was a very, very nice gesture on her part. And we sent 2 either veterans or active service members' children to full ride at camp. That left us with a balance on the 28th of $2,153.89. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you. The spring cookout, yes, that's me. We're working on that. We have our sale ticket date set up. There is a sign-up sheet for anybody that would care to volunteer to help us. We can use all the help we can get and would greatly appreciate if you would put your name on the sign-up sheet. New business. Do we have any new business? Okay, we're gonna welcome, if there's any new or returning, attendees. Would you like to stand up and tell us a little bit about your?
My name is Bill Ernst. I'm retired Navy. And I don't know if any of you know Janice Moore.
Yes.
Well, I'm her life partner. We've been together 13 years. And she finally talked me into coming here. Now, I served 24 years in the Navy, at all active duty. I went in 60. Oh, I was thinking about the Marine Corps until I saw that movie in the 50s called Jack, the DI. With that guy, whoever. I said, that was, so I joined the Navy a little after high school on a whim. Served 4 years, went to Westpac's on aircraft carriers, and this is before Vietnam. In fact, I got out in August of Vietnam, couldn't wait to get out, and I'm thinking, with the war coming, I'm gonna get extended. But Liberty in Westpac before Vietnam was fabulous. You know, 4 times in Hong Kong, you're out at sea for a couple of weeks, you're in port a couple of weeks. Well, anyways, after a year and a half, I was working for the post office and I just couldn't stand it. And I just quit the post office. And I went back in the Navy, which was the smartest thing I did. Went there, got stationed in Norfolk. When I made E5, they asked me if I wanted to train as a flight engineer on transport aircraft. So I got qualified as a flight engineer. And the last 18 years of my Navy career, I always got transferred as a flight engineer. And, I mean, I had other jobs, but got over 6,000 flights. And that really kept me in the Navy. And I don't know if many of you guys know what it's like to make Chief Petty Officer. And, you know, it's kind of a big deal in the Navy, E7. Well, I was on a flight from Norfolk, on the jump seat, C9, to Dallas. And we get a call from their squadron. Is Bill Ernst there? And I was sitting in the jump seat right there, and I said, yeah, I'm here, right here. He says, we want to know you've just been selected as Chief Petty Officer. And I couldn't believe it. And they announced it over the plane, and all the people are applauding, but and then I just finished my career as a chief and air crew and retired. And I have all good thoughts about it. Been stationed in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, Jacksonville, Atlanta, Georgia, Norfolk, Virginia, Alameda. I retired at Alameda and actually lived in Alameda until I moved to Arizona. And that's about it. And Janice was getting me to join, and well, I'm glad I did. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else? Any new or returning? All right, well, we're gonna go to the calls. Rob wants to just give us a little chuckle to end our meeting.
Thanks, Sharon. I got an interesting email the other day, and I thought that it was worthwhile to pass this on to you. And so it says, Canada declares war on the USA. President Trump was in the Oval Office when his telephone rang. Hello, President Trump, a heavily accented voice said. This is Archie up there in Harpseal Pub in Badgers Cove, Newfoundland, Canada. I'm calling to tell you that we're officially declaring war on you. Well, Archie Trump said this is indeed important news. How big is your army? Right now, said Archie, after a moment's calculation, there is myself, your cousin Harold, your next door neighbor Mick, and the whole dart team from the pub. That makes 8. Trump paused. I must tell you, Archie, that I have 1 million men in my army waiting to move on my command. Wow, said Archie, I'll have to call you back. Sure enough, the next day Archie calls back, Mr. Trump, the war is still on. We've managed to acquire some infantry equipment. We have 2 combines, a bulldozer, and Harry's farm tractor. President Trump sighed. I must tell you, Archie, that I have 16,000 tanks and 14,000 armored personnel carriers. Also, I've increased my army to 1.5 million men since we last spoke. Lord above, said Archie, I'll be getting back to you. Sure enough, Archie rang again next day. President Trump, the war is still on. We've managed to get ourselves airborne. We have a modified Harrigan's ultralight with a couple of shotguns in the cockpit, and 4 boys from the Legion have joined us as well. Trump was silent for a minute and then cleared his throat. I must tell you, Archie, I have 10,000 bombers, 20,000 fighter planes. My military complex is surrounded by laser-guided surface-to-air missiles. And since we last spoke, I've increased my army to 2 million people. Jumping, Lord, thundering 2 million. I'll have to call you back. Sure enough, Archie called again the next day. President Trump, I'm sorry to have to tell you that we have had a call off this their war. I'm sorry to hear that, said Trump. Why the sudden change? Well, said Archie, we've all sat together down and had a long chat over a bunch of pints and come to realize that there's no way we can feed 2 million prisoners.
Okay, do we have anything else for the good of the cause? Yep.
Thank you.
Bob got me started on this. I just recall something I read a couple of days ago about the military. There was a guy who was training in the military. He was in the Air Force, and he was going to be an engineer or navigator or something. And he rode in some kind of a fighter jet that has 2 seats, one in front and one in back. It was his first flight. So the pilot crawls in, and he gets in the seat behind the pilot. And the pilot's going through the checklist, getting ready to fire up the engines. And at the last minute, the guy in the back said, just in case something goes wrong in the air and we need to eject, he says, is there anything I should know? And the pilot said, yeah. He says, if I say go and you say what, you're going to be talking to yourself.
Anything else for the good of the cause?
Yes, I just want to say, this is your first meeting as the president,
Yes.
and you've added a comedy hour. Congratulations. You did a great job on your first meeting. Thank you very much for stepping up.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, I guess we're adjourned.